This is a Onenie original podcast.
Mildly Affable with Terry Bean, featuring Jenny Holiday, a.k.a. Bossy Skirt.
A.k.a. Bossy Skirt. I love that. So we've got tons of stuff to cover and talk about.
Yes, we do. Can we start with the fact that we're sitting at a desk that is exactly like my desk in my office?
We are sitting in an office that is exactly like your old office. I mean, to some extent, in the same building.
Oh, well, that's true, too.
Right?
Yeah.
So odds are, and I think all of this furniture was from the same company at one point.
Oh, but this is actually my personal desk at home.
Oh,
this
so,
is an IKEA desk.
So this is not related to?
No,
okay,
it's
I
not.
thought it could be.
No,
yes.
we're going to go after IKEA as a sponsor because this is a fantastic desk.
Oh, see, nice product placement. It's very subtle. We could talk about how it's right here. It's very glassy. Seems to be relatively scratch-proof. It'd be cool if I start carving.
Actually, I can say from experience, it's actually not scratch-proof. I
not
have too many. As I take a sip of my little itty-bitty bottle of water.
Yes. Probably their neighbors at Costco, right?
Can I explain to you why they're so small?
They are so small. I was asking about that.
I will tell you why. These are a mother's dream because you give your kid a bottle of water and they drink 4 sips and they don't touch it again. And then nobody wants to touch the half-drank bottle of water. So you got it laying all around you. So the little tiny ones, lifesaver, budget saver.
Perfection.
That's the deal behind the little bottles of water.
Had a party for the kid, right? 14 years old. She had all her friends over. There's 25 14-year-olds running around. Go to clean up. There are 27 different bottles of 16.9 ounce water
exactly.
with a sip and a half out of them.
See how smart Kirkland is?
Oh,
Second product placement opportunity.
This is it, right? We really need to figure out how to get better at that. That'd be a good idea. So talk us through Bossy Skirt. What was the inspiration? How did that even begin? And who does it serve and what do you do? And
well, I would say probably like most of us, you come to something, especially if it's a genuine passion. It's a journey, right? So truly, I've given this some thought. Bossy Skirt, which is my brand, which launched September 17th, was probably born in the early 90s. I was working at a fairly large corporation, and they pick every year they pick 5 people from each location to be in this really premium management training program. It was a 4-month program, very elite and fantastic to be chosen. And I think back on that now, that's probably when I fell in love with professional development, because they really spent 4 months going through all of the nuts and bolts, the psychology, the behavioral stuff on what it takes to be a great leader. So, and I just loved it. I was like a fish in water. So I would have to say it probably started then. But then I was fortunate enough to have a really successful career. And so I obviously spent a lot of time not only leading, but developing talent through my career. And I'm a woman of a certain age, 51.
and it's an age.
And I started noticing probably the last half a dozen years or so that the people development part was by far the most satisfying thing for me. So I started just gravitating toward that more and more. I used to show leadership TED Talks at all my staff meetings. And so I left the industry that I was in and decided I wanted to do something more purposeful with my very last chapter. And so I had this idea, what if I took all of these lessons that I had, and you have an inside executive, not somebody who came to their lessons through academia or research, but somebody who actually lived it for decades, and shared all of my knowledge with the next generation. And I thought, there's all kinds of stuff we learn through trial and error that you didn't get taught in school, that's not going to show up in the employee handbook. So maybe I can kind of be an inside baseball coach for the next generation of young professionals. So I started doing that.
That is so cool.
I
You're
love it.
super committed to it and put out a ton of great content. I was kind of surprised to see your hair down today. I thought maybe it would be up.
I know.
Had that whole Bossy Skirt look. I was like, you're a little off brand right now. I'm not even sure it's going to be okay.
Can I tell you? So when you have long hair, all the ladies out there know this. You put it up all the time, but that's my Bossy Skirt persona with my hair up and my glasses on. So now I feel like I'm in character when I have it up. So I definitely wear it down more often.
You're like, does it take, what's the timeline? Does it take longer to put up or longer to put down?
Oh God, no! You put it up in a minute. That's why we women love to wear our
That's why
hair
it's tough to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So now you're like, oh man, I'm not in character. I got to really work through this whole thing.
Actually, no, because I have naturally curly hair. So Terry made me get here really early this morning, and 696 is closed. So no, this is my naturally curly hair. That's the least amount of effort. So I normally spend the time to straighten it.
Yeah, I mean,
A lot of stuff on grooming.
Well, this is important.
What was your routine this morning, Mister?
I showered. I did, and that was exciting, right? I showered in the gym. The shower curtain not quite wide enough to cover the entire shower on either side, so it's kind of fun. You're like peeking out there, seeing who's peeking in.
You know, I'm really impressed with your health kick. You should talk about that for a minute.
I have a health kick.
You did your paddleboard every day.
I love the paddleboard.
You only just had a day where you didn't do it, and now you're going to the gym because you can't paddleboard every day.
Yeah,
Talk to me about that.
So November ended the whole paddleboard thing, right? The goal was to hit 100. And the goal started because June 14th, I'd only been out there 2 times. I'm like, this is BS. I live here. I got to get out here more. I gotta set a goal. I got to hit a goal. So I think I set it for 50. And I got in a roll. And what I learned about goal setting is the more streaks you can go on and the longer you can keep those streaks continuous, the easier achieving that goal becomes. And I'm like, and then you're like, well, I broke it. I got 9 days in a row, but I couldn't get 10. Let's see if I can beat that, you know? And then all of a sudden you're back at it. So it was cool.
Yeah.
I was done with 50 by the end of August. I'm like,
Wow.
yeah. Proof that we had a decent summer, right?
Right.
You know, and I was like, I don't care if it rains, and I don't care if it's wavy. I'm gonna do it because I live on a small lake, so wavy is like kind of a laughable term in a sense. Like, wavy. It's like my hair is very wavy. So, you know, we did that. Me and the mouse in my pocket on the paddleboard, right? It was
You
cool.
and your motivation did that.
Me and my motivation. And then bumped it up to 75 and cranked that, and then said, no, I'm going to hit 100. And so there were days when it was 27 degrees. I'm out paddleboarding because I wanted to hit the goal, but I loved it. And then that ended, so I switched to the gym.
Did you hit 100?
Yeah.
Dude.
103 ended up last Sunday.
Wow.
Because we had that really nice Sunday, December 2nd. We got to go out on the board. Come on, man.
Now, how long have you lived on a lake?
7.5 years.
And is this the first year ever that you have taken advantage of it to this degree?
I think I normally water ski more than I did this year. I've paddleboarded a bunch. I don't know that last year I hit 40 though, and I didn't really keep count. What happens is I learned a bit ago that if I can get in the water and I can float on my back and keep my ears and most of my face like above water, or keep my ears in, but most of it just my mouth, my eyes, and my nose above. I can go into some Zen-like meditation, float, and connect with the deepest levels of all that I am.
That's amazing.
And so the paddleboard's a vehicle to go do that up until it's 27 degrees. Then it's like, so, you know, the reason paddleboarding's so cool is it hits me in the physical sense. I work through whatever I'm doing work-wise or marketing-wise or business-wise or whatever, relationship-wise. So it hits me mentally. And then there's that spiritual connection that is so deep that I'm thinking about going and getting a hot tub so I can do it in the winter.
Good for you.
So,
I didn't realize that was a component of it. That makes so much sense, though.
It's so good.
Being able to quiet your mind, find your truth, stay centered. Yeah, super important.
Absolutely. So, you know, it's meditation underwater, right? Which is a good place to do it.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I've had a good time. So I'll have 4 months off. There's ice on the lake, right?
So the gym probably isn't going to give you the same meditation opportunity.
Gym does not.
So where are you going to find that this winter?
So I don't know if I'm going to. I might take the time off and rekindle and get kind of wrapped back up in the rest of the world, and maybe maybe gain some of that edge back. You know, it's an interesting balance between being too chill and too relaxed and too hyped up. And, you know, I'm not saying I got too relaxed in summer, but things slow down a bit, man, as well they should.
Absolutely, they should.
As well they should.
Well, so I would just suggest that you could probably do a nice, easy 5 or 10 minute yoga stretch at the gym to find that, because I think that mental balance, I think we need that all the time. I don't think you should take a 4-month break from that.
No, but so we're clear. I spent so much time 10 years ago, 15 years ago, finding the piece that I have. I don't have to spend as much time looking for it as most people do, because I'm like, oh, here I am, totally zen.
Okay.
Right? So I got really fortunate. Well, fortunate my ass. I did the work. Right?
So I don't know if so I would say then that you're saying you can kind of put it on autopilot.
I'm not saying I can put it on autopilot. I'm saying that I can access that level of consciousness.
So, so paint me a picture on how do you do that on a daily basis? You're not paddleboarding. You're having a hectic day. You need to access it because you know you need to get recentered. Do you have some sort of routine or?
I practice presence like repeatedly. So I don't sit a lot and worry about what's happened in the past. I don't even really focus too much on the future, right? I knew that you and I were meeting at 9:15. I knew that at 9:10, I was farther than 5 minutes away, right? That's just how it was. And I probably knew at 8:40 when I got in my car, I was going to run into that. But I also knew that you are cool, patient, calm, have my number. We're probably going to be running close to on time, maybe a minute or two late yourself, and that if you needed anything, you would call. And so at 9:14, you called me, and I said, I am 4 minutes away, and I didn't worry about any of that shit.
So you're saying that because you have this presence of mind, because you can stay centered outside of a regular meditation routine, it helps you manage each situation more effectively.
I don't stress over things that most people stress over. Right? I just don't, because ultimately I know what the long game is, right? So I'm not. What
does stress you out?
My wife spending too much money stresses me out.
Okay.
That causes me, in the conversation around that causes me some stress. Yeah, I don't know if there's really, really anything else.
Nice.
And fortunately that happens enough, so I'm covered there.
Right.
No, but I mean.
I got plenty of stress.
We're
it
good.
happens enough.
No, man, I'm just kidding.
I know you are.
Listen, I got lucky, and I was thinking about this the other day. Dr. Richard Carlson wrote a book years and years ago, 80s. Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yep.
It's all small stuff.
Yep.
And I read that when I was 16 years old. And I took that shit seriously.
Yeah, good for you. It's interesting. I've had to manage a lot of stress, and I'm used to it because for years I had, really big jobs and large financial responsibilities, and it's like anything, right? You get used to it, and so what might stress other people out, you've figured out how to manage. But it's funny for me going through this entrepreneurial journey. I just got an article the other day sent to me by a dear friend about the mental health strain of entrepreneurship. And I had not connected those dots, probably because in many ways what I'm doing now is new to me. So because it all feels new, it's harder for somebody like me to isolate the variable. But I've definitely been more stressed than I ever have been. And I don't think, from the outside looking in, people are like, oh, it's so cool. What she's doing is so fun. It's all for herself. She's following her passion. It's all good. And all those things are true. But all of the worries that come with having your make or break journey be based solely on you and your talent and your initiative and your creativity, we don't talk about it enough, because entrepreneurship is considered so sexy and everybody wants to be their own boss. But there's a downside to it that I hadn't really seen articulated before. So I was so thankful when he sent the article, because I'm like, this was this was really enlightening for me, and it was just helpful to be able to even put some definition to it. So I'm definitely more stressed than I used to be, but it's a different kind of stress.
It's a scary roller coaster ride. There's absolutely no doubt. And it's one of those things where you take a couple of steps forward, and if you've done it long enough, you start looking around going, all right, where's the step backward coming from? Because it's you're due. I'm expecting you any minute. And that's just the world that you're in.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you're to your point. I think some people talk about it. I don't think enough people talk about it. Yeah. And more importantly, I think we glorify at this point the wrong things, right? We're glorifying hustle. We're glorifying competition and killing it. And right, the words we use are so stress-inducing that busy. Oh my God! If I hear one more person talk about how busy they are. Right? Why I don't grasp, that I don't fully understand, and I wish that people would say, we don't have to be like that, right? We're making those choices, we're putting that stress on us, and then we're wondering why people are dying young or having heart attacks. I've had 3 friends go into the hospital in the last year because they were all running around acting and somewhat being busy, but ultimately, I want productive. I don't care about busy. I don't care about grinding. I want to have fun, right? I tell people all the time, I'm a dolphin, right? Playing in business. I'm not a shark. So maybe I don't have stress because I don't do some of the things that people do. That's entirely possible too.
Well, so I have 2 thoughts there. The first one is I actually shot 2 different Bossy Script videos about this. One is never confuse activity with achievement.
Beautiful.
And it's very easy for people to get caught up in daily tasks that drive 0 value.
Got that checklist. Got to get that check mark.
And so then a second video to help prioritize that was make sure you're spending your time by revenue. The things that drive the most value are the things that should be at the top of your list. So those are some easy hacks. But I will tell you, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on this, when I think about those of us that are in the content creation business, knowing that you have to put out content, and you gave me props at the beginning of this, which I appreciate, and I've probably, in the, 10 weeks since I've launched, I think I've put out 45 pieces of content. So on the one hand...
Killing it. Grinding.
Right, but I'm going to challenge you here a little bit, because you just said, everybody's so encouraging, and everybody thinks the content creation business is so fun and sexy. But you know what? For it to be done well, it's not about me just turning on the camera and recording a video. The moment I start doing that, the content's going to be for shit. The reason why I think the content's good so far is because I only turn on the camera when I have something to say. And sometimes those come in waves, and I'll be moved by the spirit, and I'll know there are 5 or 6 things that I thought about this week that I want to hurry and make into a video. And there are other times when I feel like, no, right now my well's dry. And if I turn on that camera, I will give nothing of value. There will be no authenticity and passion in the message that I want to send. And so I'm trying really hard to be disciplined about when to capture it. But I will tell you, finding that mojo and scheduling that content creation right now is a very important truth that I'm trying to make sure I meet. But this is where some of the stress comes from. Sometimes I think, how in the hell am I going to do this a year from now? Like, is my well as deep as I think? Is this sustainable? I hope so. I feel like it is. We spend so much time at work. It's such a deep subject. That's what I've chosen to focus on. Hopefully it'll always take care of itself. But I got to tell you, Terry, sometimes I think, I don't know if I can.
I know you can, because you're the type of person that has good conversations with people, and you can take those conversations into lessons to share with other folks, right? You see things in an angle that most people don't. So you ask the questions, you're curious, you have insight, you can relate it to your own past experience and digest it in a way that makes sense to people that are trying to move forward. And as long as you're out there, I don't care if you're reading, listening to podcasts, or talking to folks, as long as you're putting information in, there will be information that comes through you as a result. That's
an interesting perspective, and that gives me hope. How do you do that, though? Because you put out a lot of content too. Where does your inspiration come from?
But I don't do it like you do, right? I just throw the camera on whether I have something to say or not.
But you always have something to say.
I always have something to say.
do.
But I don't always get on the camera because, like you, I'm like, if I'm not like, this is the topic that actually matters, I won't. I'm streaky with video too. I'll go, now I'm like, all right, if I can throw 2, maybe 3 out a week, I'm going to be doing well. And I'm having a hard time making the time because I don't sit still long enough to say, what's the message they need to hear today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we actually both held each other accountable to answering that question or something like it, it would be a practice well worth getting into.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but it's the same thing we just talked about. I read, I listen, I watch, I pay attention, I ask questions, and as such, I get insight. And I say this all the time when I'm speaking to an audience. I'm not speaking to an audience. I'm a conduit for whatever information that audience needs to hear. I barely even take any credit for it. The credit I can take is I figured out how to get open enough to get the info. I own that. But that's about it.
That's really good, though. That's really good. I will tell you, one of the things that I also struggle with is, everybody talks about our short attention spans. So for my videos, I try to keep them all to a minute or less. And I'll be honest, that's because of Instagram, right?
Yeah,
you can't
for sure.
post anything more than a minute. But I do find that sometimes I have more I want to say, and a minute isn't enough. But the medium, and maybe because of the way we have to produce content, we're all complicit in creating these small sound bites. But I'll give you an example because I would love your perspective on this. So I did a video earlier this week because I read this article over the weekend that just infuriated me. It was in Forbes magazine, and Forbes usually does a really good job of, I think, producing great relevant content for professional millennials. So I track them and I love their stuff. But this weekend there was an article, it came out on Saturday morning, about how older professionals like you and I should not give feedback to millennials because it's so upsetting, it'll backfire. And instead, you should try this approach. And so they took I didn't even repost the article in my criticism of it because I didn't want to give them any more readers, but basically saying, use a very generic coaching style, try and use generalities whenever possible, speak about team behaviors as opposed to individual behaviors. Well, again, when I said Bossy scripts coming from real world experience, I can tell you, I can look you right in the eye and say, difficult, upsetting feedback is often the most common way that somebody with high potential rounds a corner to reach that potential. And the moment we start coddling people because that conversation is upsetting is the moment we all start lowering the bar and accepting mediocrity. So I don't often get fired up, but I got fired up. So I shot a video about how important it is to be comfortably coachable and how that becomes a virtuous circle of performance improvement. And I couldn't get the video under 2 minutes. I just couldn't. There was too much to say because I had to walk you through how to handle it when you first hear it, no matter how upsetting or how easy it is to be defensive. Take some time to find that kernel of truth in that feedback. Ask for specific examples so that you can identify your behaviors that you know you need to change. Circle back with your boss afterward to see if you've actually demonstrated improved performance, demonstrating to your boss that you're comfortable getting the feedback, so please give me more. Then that gives your boss permission to give you more feedback. And before you know it, you're accelerating more quickly than the competition, i.e. your coworkers. And that's how you start to get ahead. Well, I couldn't squeeze all of that into a minute.
Right.
So it's a 2-minute video. The views are so much lower than a regular minute-long video.
So could you even upload it? And I'm clapping because I want to make sure that we cut this whole part out and do something with it and make it a 2-minute video. Hopefully. But how did you even upload it or what?
So I uploaded it to every channel as is, and on Instagram I knew it was just going to automatically cut it off at a minute.
Yeah.
So in the description I said, I refuse to shortchange this video. It's an incredibly important topic. It'll help accelerate your career. And I put it on the homepage of my website. Please go to bossyskirt.com to watch the video in its entirety.
Love it.
2 people went to the homepage to watch the video in its entirety.
Well, they have to click and move their hand. It's very difficult.
But that goes back to, I'm curious for your feedback on this because you and I both so much live in this space. We're forced to conform to the formats that support the space that sometimes it's I think getting in the way of the information and knowledge we're trying to share.
Right, and it's weird to have to try and condense something that's actually wisdom into 60 seconds or less, right? That's like the antithesis of what wisdom should be.
Right.
I want to actually take a position on your point, though, from the article, because it's interesting to me. That whole thing sounds like what some 47-year-old white woman surrounded in suburbia thinks a millennial wants to hear.
I think you just nailed the profile photo I saw on the byline.
Right?
Yeah,
because
you're
that
right.
doesn't
Yeah.
seem to me like what a 24. I can go get a handful of 24-year-olds to parade through here, and we can ask them, would you rather have direct feedback that actually tells you what you need to do so you can improve, or do you want me to coddle you and hold you like a baby and maybe burp you while you're up here? I can see why you'd be fired up. It fires me up a little bit.
That and the source. Like I said, I think Forbes usually does a really good job of helping millennials navigate professional space. And so if it had been from a less reputable source, I would have dismissed it. Like, of course you don't know what you're talking about. But the fact that it was a source that I value, I was like, oh my God, guys, I'm sure there are millennials who subscribe to these feeds because you put out such great content. Why in the hell are you promoting this message?
Can you comment on that article?
Yeah, well, like I said, a lot of times I'll do that. But in fact, we should talk about gender politics because I have a good news story that was the same thing. But typically, if I want to promote an article or tie a video to an article, I can reference it, hyperlink it. So if they want to read the article, they can, and then see my take on it through the video. I did that with a Mark Cuban article.
Smart.
But with this one, I refused to because, like I said, I didn't want to give the article more reads.
Well, I didn't necessarily say, can you share the article? I said, can you go to the article and comment?
Oh, yeah. I'm
right?
sorry. Yeah,
so people
sure.
that are
Yeah,
already there.
yeah.
So Ask Bossy Skirt
Yeah.
should actually comment on that.
It's a really good point.
With your take and your reaction
It's
to
a
it.
really good point. Yeah.
That's a great way to drive.
Yeah.
Because there's got to be people that are like, yeah, tell them.
Yeah.
You know, especially, hopefully, God willing, please let there be 24-year-olds or 30-year-olds or whatever that are like, yeah, give it to us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because how else do you learn?
Yeah.
And you know, maybe that's too much of a pattern interrupt, right? But whatever it is that garners someone's attention right now, because that's the currency that we're all playing with,
Yeah.
right? And so if you don't smack somebody upside the head or dot them between the eyes, they don't hear what you're saying or see what your message is anyway.
It's so true that we have to be somehow provocative and polarizing to be able to get the views. And, you know, that's not what work is about. Work is about finding ways to establish a middle ground. You know, work is about trying to behave appropriately, respond appropriately, find opportunities. And, you know, so a lot of those basic tenets of being a successful professional don't live in that really provocative, polarizing space at all. So that's part of my challenge. When I was first deciding to launch Bossy Skirt, I pulled the top 20 YouTube channels. Work is nowhere on that list, not even close. You know, it's food, health, gaming, beauty, travel. So, but I feel in my heart there's a market, again, because we spend so much time at work.
So much time at
Yeah.
work, like
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Because we're busy.
Yeah. So I want to tell you about the Mark Cuban article because I would love your thought on this. I know you and I love to talk about Me Too, which we probably should as well. But so I had filmed a Bossy Skirt video about the importance of being likable. And it was one of the first videos I had shot. And it's funny, I had read an article in the Wall Street Journal back in like 2009 or 2010 that talked about the power paradox. Very well established dynamic that nice people, good people, popular people are the ones who get promoted. And as soon as they get promoted, not as soon as, but eventually over time, the vast majority of them become jackasses.
Interesting.
So it's called the power paradox. There's been a lot of research on it. And that always struck me because I was in a position of power at the time that I read it. And it's like, boy, this is who I want to make sure I never become. And one of my most favorite quotes is Abraham Lincoln's, if you want to test a man's character, don't give him adversity, give him power. So I was just always interested in that subject anyway. And so one of the lessons that I learned early on that, again, would never show up in your employee handbook is the importance of being likable. So I filmed it, I edited, I really liked it, and then I let myself get nervous about the fact that that video I will be attacked by women because it will appear to be too female.
Oh, right.
Because we're always accommodating, right? And so I sat on it. Then one day I come across this article. It wasn't by Mark Cuban, but it was about Mark Cuban because he had just sat down for an interview and he said one of the most underrated qualities of business people today is being nice. And I'm like, exactly, Mark Cuban. So as soon as I read it, I did what I told you. So I attach his article, I highlight him in LinkedIn, and then I post the video on the importance of being likable. So I felt all proud of myself and thanked him in the posting for giving me the courage to share my opinion. And then I thought to myself, Jenny, you just waited for a man to give you permission to say what you already know is true. So the things that we do to ourselves, and I don't know if it's because if you're putting content out there, you have to be as aware of your critics as you are of your fans, which I'm sure lots of really successful people would tell us don't focus on that at all, but I can't help but think about it. But anyway, it really made me take a long, deep look at even as somebody as fearless as me and accomplished as me and as experienced as me could still fall victim to such a stupid trope.
So, but here's the thing. If you would have seen an article that was the exact same thing that Mark Cuban was talking about, and it was by Barbara Cochran, also from Shark Tank, if she would have said the same thing Mark Cuban would have, you would have had the exact same reaction.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Right?
Yes,
So
you're right.
It's not
you're
even...
Right.
It's,
you're so good giving me permission.
yeah,
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, I'm a man, that's why.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, I'm doing it again. Jesus. Oh, you're so funny.
So no, that was like my first thought as you were talking about it. I'm like, it just happened to be that it was him.
Yeah.
So I think you're okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you're gonna be all right.
I'm coming to grips with it. I'm coming to grips with it.
We'll be asleep tonight.
But gender politics is so much fun. There's a young professional. She works in Ann Arbor. She loves Bossy Skirt, and she's been texting me saying she wanted to give me some ideas. So we met for a drink last Friday, and I'm like, okay, so tell me what you wanted me to talk about. And the number one thing on her list was relationships at work.
Oh, okay.
And which is so common. And I explained to her some of the stats that I knew, like 45% of us have relationships with people who we work with, and a third of those end in marriage. So it's not news that we can become romantically involved and maybe even find a life partner at work. But because of that truth, the whole Me Too thing, I think that's why it's so confusing, because by its essence, it can't help but mingle legitimate relationships, healthy consensual relationships, and inappropriate work behavior. Because the difference between the two is the word I just used of consensual.
Well, I was going with likability. Right?
That too.
Yeah, right?
That
Totally.
too.
You don't
That too.
have inappropriate relationships with people you don't... You only have inappropriate relationships with people you don't like.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Otherwise, they're totally appropriate and they're fine.
Exactly. Well, it was funny because the Les Moonves, the new revelations just came out in the news this morning. I was listening to him on my way here about all of the ways that he was trying to obstruct the investigation into him and his behavior because he's trying to protect his $120 million severance package.
That's my guy.
Yeah. But, situations like that, Me Too and the guardrails, super, super clear. Super clear. Apparently he kept a woman on standby for blowjobs. I mean, just as bad as it gets, right? So you have that on one end.
You're saying that's wrong. I just want to make sure
that's
you're
wrong.
on record. Okay, got it.
So let's say that it's a spectrum, and we've got Les Moonves and his standby on, what do they call him in the porn industry? The fluffer?
Fluffer.
His standby fluffer is one end of the spectrum, and the person who you meet at work and end up starting a life with is on the other end of the spectrum. Then you have all this stuff in between, right? And sometimes they're relationships and you're dating and they're boyfriends and girlfriends, and sometimes it's a boss who acts inappropriately, and sometimes it's a coworker who acts. I mean, it's just one great big hodgepodge mess. And I think it has a lot of really good people wondering, what's okay?
Where's the line?
Yeah.
Where's the line?
And I hear some women say, a good guy doesn't have to ask where the line is. And I totally disagree with that.
Oh my God! All good guys want a lesson plan on where the line is. Just speaking as a mildly affable fella, we need a line.
Yeah, exactly.
We need a line because, and I appreciate that a good guy doesn't have to ask, right? But to some extent, he does because the reality is your line is different than her line is different than her line is different than her line.
Exactly.
Regardless of where my line is.
Exactly. And you know why all of her lines are different?
Yeah.
Because it begins at welcome, or said more clearly, any sort of workplace sexual harassment begins at unwelcome.
Yeah.
And if for Jane, your or insert man here's behavior is fun, enjoyable, and welcome, then you're going to have a whole different yardstick with her than you are with Sue, who is just a different person, has different boundaries. And so what's welcome to Jane may not be welcome to Sue. And so the bad news for men is it's important to understand the difference between Jane and Sue.
And what's crazier than that is the dude that approaches Jane is going to have a different welcome or response from Jane than the other dude that approaches Jane doing the same shit.
So true, because welcome, right? I might welcome.
Good luck.
I might. I think it was like Gene Simmons or some rock star or somebody who said something like,
Oh, he welcomed a lot.
"Oh yeah," and he
Supposedly.
was very welcomed by lots of fans.
I'm sure he was.
And I think he made the comment about, suddenly I'm not allowed to slap a girl on the butt. And a male professional had quoted that to me, and I said, that's Gene Simmons. I'm sure that the women who want Gene Simmons to smack them on the butt is a much larger number than the women who want you to slap them on the butt. So, yeah, he has a different yardstick.
Right? And that's how they measure his tongue, I think.
Oh, God, that thing is so gross. Oh, that thing is so gross.
I'm glad I waited on the Gene Simmons tongue joke because I didn't see that coming. I had one. I just didn't know it was going to be right there.
You're very
great.
spontaneous.
Yeah, it was good.
The other piece of advice, and actually as we're talking, I'm probably going to make a Bossy Script video on this later today.
See how this works?
The easiest thing to do, let's go back to our Jane and Sue analogy, and let's say you've got Bob and John. The easiest thing to do is to ask Jane or Sue, have I ever done anything that's made you uncomfortable? Is there ever anything in my behavior that's been unwelcome?
We can do that? We can just ask?
Absolutely, you can ask.
This would solve so many problems.
Wouldn't
Can we do it
it?
outside of Me Too movement too, or is it really
Please.
just specific to that?
It's just, you're building workplace relationships, and everybody's allowed to have boundaries, as I say. All you want to do is understand them so that you can continue to build an excellent relationship
Oh my gosh.
with both Sue and Jane.
That is such a good idea. So practical, so easy to implement.
I have another one too.
I can't wait.
This is how I know there's a video coming, because my head's percolating. The other thing I would tell to Bob or John is treat Jane or Sue like your significant other is in the room. Because the way men behave when they are with wives, spouses, girlfriends is very different than they'll sometimes behave with women when their spouse or significant other isn't in the room. So if you want a guardrail, if you want a little, angel on your shoulder, just picture your significant other sitting there, and it probably will help guide your behavior.
Or your mom, maybe.
Yeah, even your mom.
Yeah, but definitely your significant other.
Whoever's going to keep you honest.
Well, whoever's going to make sure you line up. So I was raised by my mom, so I give her a lot of credit for not necessarily knowing where the boundaries are, because, again, those are movable lines, but for at least considering the fact that there are boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think that's the difference. Now, I have a tendency to try and push up against those every now and again because that's kind of my personality type. But it's mostly because I'm trying to entertain myself.
Well, the other thing about this conversation that sometimes makes me very impatient is chemistry at work is a really valuable thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's necessary to get shit done.
Absolutely. Great stuff happens when people really connect. In fact, I was having a conversation with a young man who wasn't sure if he had an interview or not just now. And I was explaining that actually was an interview. And the reason why they didn't discuss your resume is because they were trying to get a sense of chemistry and fit. That's such an important component when you're filling a job position that nobody ever talks about. But so that plays into gender relationships at work as well. We can have really great chemistry in platonic relationships that create better outcomes. And creating a completely sanitized work environment, I think I read somewhere post Les Moonves that CBS has outlawed hugging. I mean, it's just stupid. All you're going to do is lower the bar. If you can't figure out how to manage these relationships in an appropriate manner and just do a broad swath approach like that, you're probably going to negatively impact the quality of the work that gets done.
I like that. You just hit me with like a ton of bricks just fell on my head. Outlaw hugging.
Yes.
That's a weird line in a weird world that we're entering. So is it this big of a deal, or is it perceived to be this big of a deal? Right? So I go back to the lady talking about how you can't give constructive feedback to a millennial, which to me is, okay, fine, you have a perspective. Your perspective sucks, but you have one, and good for you for communicating it. There are definitely very clear cut, you can't do that shit. But the rest of it is it a perception thing and we're just talking about it a lot and it's not necessarily happening? Or are there things that are really going on that aren't cut and dry that we're just making a big deal out of?
I think that there are two answers to your question. The first one is, I would say that policies like outlaw hugging, that's lazy.
Okay.
These can be complex and difficult issues, and they demand complex and difficult solutions that are well thought out. And so you can either do that work or you can outlaw hugging. So I think when we hear examples of that, let's just assume they did the least amount of work. The other thing I would say, though, is obviously sexual harassment has been a subject at work. Most of us have been through sexual harassment training at work for decades. None of this is new. What I think is new, and I do think it's a big deal, but I don't think, like I said, that it's new, and that is back to what we were talking about earlier, power corrupts. The vast majority of the really horrible Me Too stories that have made the press come with a person who is in a substantial position of power. That's what makes the situation terrible for a couple of reasons. Number one, that person now has control over my livelihood as a professional. So one of the best things that I heard the Supreme Court rule when it came to sexual harassment issues is never confuse voluntary with willing. So what I may choose to do voluntarily to protect my job does not mean that I did that willingly. So the Les Moonves blowjob on demand, I have a very hard time believing that that was done willingly. But this all started with Harvey Weinstein, as we know, but all of the things that have come out since, the most horrendous are when a person in power exploits that position, especially with subordinates and underlings or people whose careers they can dramatically influence. Now, that's why I say I don't think that's new. I think power has been corrupt. Power has the ability to corrupt as long as power has been around. And I would argue that because we're just humans, sex has been part of that currency for a very long time as well. I just think a lot of really important stories have now been told. But I mean, let's face it, the Hollywood casting couch has been, you want to talk about tropes. That's been around forever.
Cliche,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's actually beyond cliche.
Right. So I think we are evolving as a society, and that if we all are very familiar with that cliche, it was okay for a long, long time. Now we're living in a world where it's not. Now, is that because of social media? Is that because of women's rights? Is that because of women rising to higher ranks in the workforce? There are probably a lot of factors that are contributing to our lack of acceptance from something that has been routinely accepted for a long time. So I don't know. I'm not a sociologist, but I think it's good. I think it's good, and I hope that people who are in power are put on notice that you can't lord over people and their livelihood to those degrees.
Ever.
But I think it'll always be there.
But to your point, it's going to happen, right?
Absolutely.
There's a line from the Simpsons movie where Russ Cargill, the billionaire who's in charge of the EPA, somebody says, "Sir, you've gone mad with power." He's like, "Well, of course. You ever try going mad without power? It's boring. No one listens to you."
There you go.
So you gotta have something. But,
yeah.
Oh my God, I'm glad that the stories are out. right? I'm glad that people are on notice. I'm glad that we're seeing a sensitivity to shit that's backwards and wrong, right? But like all pendulums, they swing too far.
Yes.
You know, so at some point there's the balance, and again, I know guys that are, you know, I will tell you I'm a habitual line crosser in many areas. That's not one of them.
Right.
Right. I have never put myself in a position where I felt, well, maybe once, where I felt like I that was too far.
Okay.
Right. Because I don't. It's not how I play.
Right.
I'm probably too passive to even think like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I've watched guys that are like, holy shit, I can't believe you just said that, you know? And I don't, it was well received though.
Yes.
So now that's the mind blowing, that's the confusing part. So back to the earliest part of this conversation is there's hey, we're playful and we're having fun.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to change the players for that line to get really crystal clear, I think.
Well, and it's funny. You want to know another cliche is, you know, the powerful man marrying his secretary. So even though we can talk about men in power inappropriately leveraging that influence over somebody's livelihood, but there are also times, this is why I brought up at the very beginning of the conversation, consensual healthy relationships oftentimes are founded at work. So that's why it's a complex issue. That's why I don't think there are any simple answers. There are very simple definitions of right and wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not giving anybody an excuse to behave badly. That's not my point. My point is it wouldn't be as rampant as it was if two things weren't true, that power corrupts and that people find love at work. And the moment you have those two things happening in the same environment, confusion will ensue. So back to your example, if I'm a man in power and I have a crush on my secretary may not be reciprocating that at all. But if she's responding voluntarily as opposed to willingly, how do I, the boss, know the difference? Which is why I love to say, if you are in a position of power, you're the only one who can't find love at work. I'm sorry, it's lonely at the top for a reason. You cannot go trolling at work, period, because you will never fully know if it's voluntary or if it's willing.
I can't imagine that being any more true, right? Because how do you tell? You know, It's like rich people. How do I know if you like me or if you like my money?
Exactly. It's the exact same thing. Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Which is why I think that's the challenge too, is because really the only way for it to totally change and for it to be completely obliterated is when all of the people in power stop dating people who they work with.
Right.
And that's probably never going to happen.
And that's never going to happen.
Never going to
happen.
happen.
But at least I hope we get to a point where it's a super conscious decision that's calculated, that's been thought through, as opposed to, I mean, to some extent, you can't even control who you like.
Right.
Right? Chemistry is chemistry. You can deny it as long as you want, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not there.
Right.
Right? So how do you just have to say, all right, is this worth it, right?
Exactly. Now, I think now you're circling around what I think is an actionable HR policy, and that would be if two people at work enter into a consensual relationship, somebody has to go. Now, whether that means they transfer to another department or based on the level that they're at, one of them has to leave the company. A company should have a comprehensive policy that says you can't have both, because then you will know the ground rules going in, right?
Very clear.
It's not a swipe right conversation to get into a work relationship. It's an important conversation. You should give it plenty of thought. And if you knew that one of the consequences were, gosh, if you turn into my life partner, we have to know from the beginning that one of us eventually has to leave, then I think it's a much more transparent and healthy approach to managing the situation for everybody.
Well, and it goes back to my favorite distinction that we have in life is the difference between reacting to a situation and responding to a situation, right? Most people are super reactionary. Some people are really good at responding. Try and be the latter. So if you put your policy in place, whether it's a 3-month or a 180-day kind of, this is the transition plan that you have to go through, it's going to force that level of thought.
Yeah.
And it's weird to me, but there's a recurring theme here that people just need to think more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why? We're just in a hurry? Thinking's hard, right?
Yeah.
Is that the deal?
Yeah. Well, I think that, I think that thinking is hard. And I also think that comprehensive policies are hard as well. So think about Google. There was a bunch of stuff that came out probably 2 weeks ago when all of the Google women staged that walkout when they found out that, there were all of these things that Google was sitting on. So I don't know how much you dove into that, but I read some of it. And one of the things that came out is that consensual romantic relationships are rampant in that company, okay, all the way up to the top, and it has been as long as the company's been around. Now, again, you're going to have a bunch of 20-somethings start working with each other. You're going to work long, crazy hours. You're going to give birth to one of the greatest tech companies that ever lived. Chemistry is going to play a role. You bet there are going to be relationships. Well, you also know that you're on an incredibly exciting trajectory that probably has a big pot of gold at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if Google had the policy from the very beginning that any consensual relationship, I love your idea of putting a time frame, after 180 days, one of you has to leave. Now you're going to make a very informed choice. I know that I have a tiger by the tail with my job at Google, and I like this guy who I'm dating, but do I really want to give up what could be life-changing money and career options to date this guy? I guarantee you decisions would have been made differently if that was a consequence that was in place much earlier on.
That's a fascinating point, and I wonder what the outcome of that would be. I mean, the reality is, and it's interesting because you look at a company like Google who's going to have very selective hiring processes, which means that you're going to be paired with people that are of similar lots of different things, so that the chemistry is almost natural at that point. It's interesting because you'd be like, this is a really good pond for me to be fishing in.
Mm-hmm.
But I could go and be the top of somewhere else, and hopefully, Loverboy over here ends up making it big with the company I'm giving up on.
Yeah.
I wonder, would it be the woman that makes the choice more frequently than the man?
Probably depends on their jobs. But again, now that puts also the work back on the couple, right? Let's really be thoughtful. Whose career is it going to be? Do we matter this much to each other? What's going to be harder to find, somebody like you or a job like this? It just, I think it gives some healthy framework to the way some of these situations should be addressed.
It's an interesting conversation. I wonder, what did you rattle off some statistics earlier about relationships in the workplace?
45% of us have had a relationship with somebody who we work with.
45%.
Yeah,
and
almost
a third
half.
of them
and
end in marriage.
And a third of those end in marriage.
A third.
So it's real.
That's a big number.
It's real. We spend all of our time at work.
Yeah. Which is why it's so important that you keep doing Ask Bossy Skirt to get that shit recognized.
That's right, babe.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
I'll keep plugging away, and when I start to feel frustrated or worried that my content well is going to run dry, you're going to be my first call.
Please, I'm happy to have that conversation. And I'm sorry, I feel like I was kind of lazy the other day when you asked the question on LinkedIn. You're like, hey, what should I talk about? And I was like, go read this blog post. It's got like 11 ideas on what job seekers should be doing to network, and it's all networking related stuff. And if you turn the phrase a little bit from job seeker to, upwardly mobile professional in your building, it's the same conversation.
That was not lazy at all. In fact, I'm a reader. I'm sure you know that about me. So it was actually the perfect response because it gave me a rabbit hole to fall into.
And that was kind of like, dive in, which is always fun. So that's a great topic. If you were to think about a book or two, right, and I know it's hard to do, that's really kind of inspired you, that's taught you, that you said, this is probably the thing that people should be reading. What name one of the first couple that come to mind?
Well, the first one that comes to mind, and gosh, the author's name escapes me, shame on me, but it's called Coming Apart, and it came out in 2012. So it was pre-Trump, and I know we're not talking politics here, but it really, because I'm a marketer too at heart, it really struck me. Basically, he took 2 periods in time. He took the day that Kennedy was shot, and he compared it to I think he was in Q1 of 2012 when he wrote it. It came out at the end of 2012. And he used all of these different metrics to illustrate how a class system is developing in the United States.
Okay.
And there were just so many fantastic lessons that I took from that book. I'll try and give you just a couple. The first one was that college has become a huge sorting machine. So as the economic model for college has changed, back in the 70s, he used California as an example. The state of California has a large and very impressive state college system. Back in the early 70s, it was virtually free for anybody who could get in. And today, because of that, it's very, very difficult to get in because of the demand. And of course, the cost has risen dramatically, right? Schools are all on their own. They have to generate as much money as they can through their endowments. They try to keep tuition low, but let's face it, it's skyrocketed.
Where does we need to put a pin in where does all that money go? Because there used to be super state and government financed, and now they're just not.
Exactly. So where did all of that public funding go?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, the entire government's budget has been shrinking because our tax rates have dropped. So there's just not as much money in the public fund. This is the other thing I love to tell my young Republican professionals is go look at what the tax rates were in 1970, 72, 73 versus what they are now. We have done nothing but lower taxes. So when you do that, you obviously have to take money from somewhere, and colleges were one of the first that we cut. That was a Reagan era, which I think Reagan was a great president, but that was one of the first things that happened. But so anyway, so now let's just start with the assumption that the majority of financially viable kids go to school, okay? And yes, there's student debt that can close that gap a little bit, but by and large, it's a privilege nowadays to get a college education. So many people meet their life's partner at school. So back to what you were saying about the Google chemistry. So I probably have a similar economic background. I probably have a similar intellectual background. And so I'm going to find a partner at school. So as that becomes a big sorting machine, you start to understand how you create an upper class, right? Mm-hmm. At the same time, we've created, he called them enclaves. There are 4 enclaves in the United States around these 4 industries of finance, which the enclave is New York, politics, the enclave is D.C., tech, the enclave is Northern California, and media, and that enclave is shared between Southern California and New York. He did all of the zip code analysis that showed the richest of the rich live in those 4 enclaves, and those 4 industries are what drive the majority of our GDP. So then you look at, okay, politics shapes the policy. Media promotes the policy. Tech becomes the infrastructure. So they're all woven together, right? So now when you have the people who control everything, that's how you start to create a class system. Then he did all of these things that illustrated the shrinking of the middle class, and he used a really simple example, which is a rich person is only going to buy, 4 pillows for a bed versus how many lower end people are going to buy hundreds of thousands of pillows. Our economy is a consumer economy, so it cannot be supported on a 1% because they don't buy enough to make up for all of the people at the lower end who can no longer afford things. So he just kept on using all of these different examples to show how this train's basically left the station. The middle class will continue to shrink. Because of the control of the media and the politics, he says that the middle class has been sold the story that our problems are driven by the poor.
Right.
That it's the immigrants who are taking our jobs, and
Totally.
it's the immigrants who are draining our system.
Those guys are wiping us out.
When really it's the policies that are put forth by the 1% that insulate all of the things that they've built. That's really what's led to the obliteration of the middle class. So it was just anytime I can get a knowledge bomb dropped on me like that, I love that. And then I tend to go back and read it again and again because it's a lot to absorb. Mm-hmm. But that by far, of anything I've read in the last 10 years, that one made
the name again.
Coming Apart.
Coming Apart, 2012.
2012. And the development of a class system in the United States.
That's fascinating.
It's really fascinating.
And scary, and it's the finger pointing is my favorite. They took our jobs.
Well, what I loved about it, especially now, why it's still more relevant than ever, this was all pre-Trump. Mm-hmm. So there was nothing in the book about Democrats versus Republicans. There was nothing in the book about border walls and caravans and, the huge tax cut. None of that was even there yet. But certainly all of the things that have happened since he published the book have only proven how correct a lot of his analysis was.
It'd be an interesting field of study to look at econ at that level and really, comparing it to the sociological norms and where we are and how business is actually, not that it's corrupted, but it's certainly, there's not really a level playing field.
Well, he talks about that too, and it's cute. He gave an example of Maytag, which I forget what Midwestern city they were based in. I feel like I want to say it was Kansas. But the example that he gave was, so in the day Kennedy was shot, the CEO of Maytag lived within 3 blocks of his average frontline work staff in this town. And the cost of the CEO's home versus the cost of the dwelling where his entry-level staff lived, they were all much closer than they would be by today's standards. So I think the house that the CEO lived in was $150,000, which, in Kansas in 1960, right, it's a very, very nice house. But the house that the lowest staff member lived in, I think he put it at $5,000. And then he compared their wages. And so by any metric, whether you want to do percentage of change or applying inflation, anything you want to do to measure the gap between those, the top job and the entry-level job, we're so much closer. Now they're just exponentially higher across every industry. So that's another thing that sort of can't be denied. So I guess when you have board compensation committees that are controlled by the CEOs so that everybody's incented to make sure they're all taken care of first, everybody wants to pay the lowest possible wage, unions have been obliterated, not that I'm a union fan. There's just a lot of different factors that have gone into the insulation of our new class system.
And that part is one of the arguments I've heard is, listen, fine, don't cap anybody's income. You don't have to do that. But what you do need to do is cap the disparity between the highest level and the lowest level, right? So make it 15x or 30x or whatever that number ends up being, but you can't have a greater disparity than that.
So it's interesting you say that. This is where his pillow example came in, because I forget how he wrote the sentence, but it was basically something like, most CEOs understood in the past that having a healthy middle and lower class that could afford the products that the CEO was responsible for selling, they understood that relationship had to exist. So it wasn't a question of my salary versus your salary. It was a question of how much do we have to make sure everybody is making to keep our consumer economy healthy. They were connected in their minds, and they're not anymore. Now it's all individual compensation.
If you don't pay the people, they can't buy the things.
Yep.
It's really that simple.
Yeah.
We could do this for like 3 hours.
I know, this was so much fun. Our time's up,
for 3 hours.
Yeah.
So let's figure out how to do this for like
Absolutely.
3 hours. So let's just come back at some point.
Okay.
But yeah, now we gotta stop.
Now we gotta stop.
This is the big finale. Where's that clap, right? Were you gonna clap?
I was going to clap for you. I was going to say thanks so much for joining us on Mildly Affable with Terry Bean. We'll see you next time.
You're so funny.
That was a Onenie original podcast.